We began this program with a story on the growing mistrust Americans have for the mainstream news media there, and that is not a phenomenon limited to the U.S. Last year, when German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced that the country would take in more than 1 million refugees, headlines welcoming them dominated mainstream and social media. However, since then, Merkel's immigration policy has been criticized much more widely, and the media's coverage of the refugee story has been scrutinized much more critically. On the right, the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party has made historic gains, and it did so despite its leader accusing the news media of trying to minimize the party's exposure. The AfD's position is that public debate in Germany is managed by a media elite that uses political correctness against them, a view that resonates with some voters who feel their voices have been ignored. Many Germans see their press corps shifting from journalism to activism. And the question becomes, is it the media's role to counter the populist rhetoric fueling the country's right-wing revival? The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on the challenges of reporting on the rise of the right, this time in Germany.
Das Willkommen für die Flüchtlinge, es war und ist immer noch überwältigend.
Ich bin tatsächlich selbst etwas überwältigt.
Da haben sich auch sehr emotionale Szenen, und zwar von beiden Seiten, abgespielt, weil die Münchner wirklich die Flüchtlinge mit Applaus begrüßt haben.
These are some of the feel-good images that circulated in Germany last year after the government opened the borders and offered more than 1 million people refuge. Even the country's conservative Bild surprised many by publishing pull-out welcome guides in Arabic. 1 year on, public sentiment has changed. The political landscape is shifting. The country has taken a turn to the right. On September the 4th, the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party, or AfD, beat Angela Merkel's party to take second place in key state elections. And the German media, dominated by the public broadcasters and left-leaning papers, looked on with concern. Because they say that a key part of the AfD's right-wing populist platform is against the mainstream media itself.
The
AfD often claims that media is controlled and doesn't report the truth. If you ask an AfD supporter what the role of the media is, the widely held opinion is that some agent from the government walks in here in the mornings and gives us instruction on what can and can't be reported. Of course, that's not the case. No one turns up here and tells us what to do. And that isn't obvious for many people. The AfD leadership plays on that.
Die AfD-Führung spielt damit.
These new right-wing political movements accuse the mainstream media of not reporting the facts, of taking a rose-tinted view of the truth. They accuse them of bias in favor of the government and that they represent the political left.
Bereits jetzt sorgen die Flüchtlinge dafür, dass die deutsche Wirtschaft wächst. Dieses Jahr zusätzlich 0,3%.
It has to do with dwindling trust, and it gets expressed through that excruciating word, the Lügenpresse, the lying press.
The word Lügenpresse is loaded with historic implications. In the 1930s, it's what the Nazis would say about the media. It's recently made its way back into public discourse after it was revived by supporters of a movement called Pegida, which stands for Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the Occident. The political party, the AfD, was set up in 2013 and has capitalized on the nationalist backlash against Merkel's refugee policies. It accuses the mainstream media of bias in favor of the government, that they've opted to misrepresent them or not represent them at all.
What AfD is criticizing is not wrong. Of course, a lot of problems have been not discussed in the mainstream media. Nobody wanted to give footage to the right wing. And this is the problem. Truth is truth. And if you decide only one part of the truth is good for the public, you will fail your job.
And the biggest perceived media failing was in the coverage of the sexual assaults that took place last New Year's Eve in Cologne. The story went largely untouched for several days, and when the media did get to it, they were cautious on a significant angle, the suggestion that refugees had been among the attackers. It was a turning point. one in which the media's credibility took a hit.
It was confirmation for many people that these refugees weren't simply people fleeing war, who we should take in. Rather, they are criminals who don't respect our women, don't agree with our German culture. And this was simply proof of all these prejudices and all these stereotypes.
All of the media began reporting 4 days too late, including us. We simply weren't aware of it. We didn't have any reporter there, and many other media outlets didn't either. We actually only received the information at the office very late, when the police began to report what had really happened there, as the police had given very different press releases on New Year's Eve.
The mistrust of the media had already been building, and not just among right-wing neo-nationalists. Even before the attacks in Cologne, the general public was expressing a concern that the media weren't giving them the facts on the refugee story. In a poll conducted last year by the Allensbach Institute, while a majority of Germans said they still trusted the media on most issues, more than 40% described the reporting on refugees as one-sided. And 53% of Germans questioned said they didn't believe the media were being straight about who the refugees are, their level of qualifications, and the number of women and children among them. That shift in how Germans see their media, with the majority of them doubting the journalism produced on the refugee story, has come largely at the expense of the public broadcasting networks, ZDF and ARD, which dominate political coverage. Trying to keep a lid on some of the populist rhetoric fueling the country's right-wing revival does not meet everyone's definition of journalism. But there's some history behind this, in which Germany's public broadcasters played a part.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren.
After the Second World War, public service media played a central role in the process of denazification, an Allied initiative to rid German society, including the economy, judiciary and the press, of any remnants of National Socialist ideology. That sense of civic duty seems to have endured, but it's provoked some unease around the refugee story.
The loss of trust can be attributed to the fact that when refugees started coming to Germany last year, the country went through a honeymoon period. We were celebrating our culture of hospitality. But the story moved on, and increasingly, the refugees became targets of criticism.
Media hates complexity. Media likes and loves emotions. So the so-called welcome culture was fantastic for our media. It was romantic, it was idealistic, but it had nothing to do with the complexity of the problem. Nobody asked, what does 1 million people coming into Germany in a short term of time, what does it mean for the needs of integration? Nobody did ask this. This is the reason why our media failed totally the discussion about migration.
Public broadcasters disagree, and they disagree live, on air, on a regular basis.
Wenn man also nicht der Meinung ist, dass alle Flüchtlinge Schmarotzer sind, die verjagt, verbrannt oder vergast werden sollten, dann sollte man das ganz deutlich kundtun, dagegenhalten.
Because for these journalists, it goes much deeper, back to a haunting story Germany has seen before, one that they don't want to be telling again.